Well, as many of you probably know, it's been a fairly newsworthy week for those of us who pay attention to what's going on in the life of the church. In this case, the news revolved around a prelate named Cardinal Burke, who is quite prominent, especially as a voice for Orthodox and more traditional factions within the church, and much beloved by those demographics, who is sort of semi-retired. He used to work for the Curia for various dicasteries, but has since been dismissed from those roles and not assigned, and it was without assignment at this point. And so he finds himself still living in Rome, perhaps waiting for a new assignment. But whatever it is, and I don't really know how those who have worked in the Curia, especially bishops and cardinals, what their employment contract looks like. But I imagine that once their tasks are completed, and as many of them are advanced in age, they are then allowed to enjoy something like a retirement. So they're given like a pension and living provisions. And it seems to me that that's what was going on with Cardinal Burke. But now, more recently, just this week, rumors started to circulate that the Pope was going to revoke those as a kind of punishment towards Burke, which we'll get into perhaps the potential reasons for that. And a lot of people saying that there's no way that this is possible. This can't be true. And then eventually it did come to light that they were true and that they were confirmed. And so now, of course, the debate erupts. And I'm not so much interested in surveying the deep dive journalistic narrative that has emerged from this story, or even sort of like the tabloid narrative either, and sort of the speculative reasons for why this might have happened and what he could have done and what he should have done, et cetera, and what the Pope should have done. I'm more interested in assessing the debate that has erupted online, because like most debates that are factional, this one seems to me to have fallen back into a few different false dichotomies. And often when this happens, you can watch some of these debates take place online. You will see people supporting their particular statements, or maybe even assumptions a lot of the time, with church council excerpts or canon law excerpts, while the others have their own excerpts that they fling in isolation of these ones. And it just kind of goes back and forth. And there needs to be some way to reconcile all of these apparently competing statements that might appear within councils and canon law. Otherwise, you end up with an ecclesiology that contradicts itself. And of course, I don't think anybody would agree that that's the case. So I started asking myself this fundamental question, which is related to what degree can a person or a subject criticize a superior within the church? In the case of the Pope, can a bishop or a cardinal correct or criticize the Pope? Because that seems to be the lightning rod and the focal point of Cardinal Burke. He is famous for having signed on to a dubia in the past in which they asked the Pope for clarification for some doctrinal concerns around communion for the divorced and remarried. They didn't get a response from that. And then they eventually issued a fraternal correction saying that if this is how it's being interpreted, that's not quite right. And here's what the constant teaching of the church is. And there are some people who have responded to that saying, you can't do that. You can't correct the Pope. He's the supreme head of the church. He's infallible. No one judges the Pope. But then, of course, there are examples from church history in which popes have been corrected and even been found guilty of material heresy, which is distinct from formal heresy. Formal heresy is manifest, persistent public heresy, where even though a correction has been made, the heretic persists in that heresy. Material heresy is when you say something that isn't quite right, or you teach something that isn't quite right, but you don't necessarily know that it's not quite right. And so when, if it becomes a controversial statement or teaching, there might be a council that is convened or just some magisterial oversight in which a clarification is made, at which point the person who was teaching whatever was wrong has the opportunity to correct themselves. And if they do, then it was mere material heresy. But if they insist on persisting in it, then it becomes formal heresy. And there are examples of popes making material heresy or heretical statements in the past. And then, of course, those being corrected. In the case of Pope John XXII, I believe, he had made statements to the effect that souls, after they die, don't receive the beatific vision until after the final judgment, which is not quite right. And certain theologians and probably members of the Curia and the Magisterium offered some correction to that, at which point he amended his teaching. But does that then mean that, popes are fair game for us to be criticizing and even condemning when they say something that we disagree with or that we don't like? That's a difficult question to answer, and it seems to be where a lot of the tension exists within this debate. And in my own attempt to try to understand this better and to do some reading, I came across a distinction that was very, very helpful from St. Thomas Aquinas, who in the second part of the Summa, I think it's question 33, he makes this distinction of the different kinds of correction that can be offered. The first kind, he says, is done in charity. It's done with gentleness, with the intention of bringing back your brother or sister who has fallen into error back into the fold. The second kind he describes as an act of justice, which is often done in the interest of the common good and can justifiably use measures like punishment to coerce the erring person back onto the right path. Now, between those two forms of correction, St. Thomas says that in the first form, that is charity, offered in reverence and gentleness, he says that charity is available to anyone. Anyone can exercise charity. Therefore, a subject can offer correction in charity, and a prelate can offer correction in charity. And in this case, the affair that we're discussing today, a prelate can offer a charitable correction to the Pope. In the second case, in which it is an act of justice, only superiors can exercise that kind of authority towards their subjects. And this is because a subject cannot authoritatively wield punishment as a means of correcting their superiors. And it should be added that St. Thomas points out that when a subject does correct his superior, it should always be done in a becoming manner, not with impudence or harshness, without vitriol, without condemnation, without malice, of course, but always with gentleness and respect. Now, then as we go to survey different statements from councils and canon law, which are often the part of the tool chest of those that are engaging in debate about this online, we can use that distinction to kind of cut through and to clarify and to harmonize these various, sometimes seemingly contradictory statements. One that is often used among those who justify their criticisms of the magisterium or of the Pope, especially more recently with the Francis pontificate, is Canon 212, that says that the lay faithful have the right and the duty to express their opinions to the magisterium. And it even goes on to say that this doesn't have to be done merely and privately. It can be done in public for the good of the church. But also in the spirit of what St. Thomas taught earlier, it has to be done with reverence, with gentleness, and with charity. And it also needs to be tempered by Canon 1373, which is the other side of this debate, which is often invoked to establish that you can't criticize the Pope, which says that you can't incite hatred towards the magisterium or towards ordinaries because of some decision or some teaching that they have exercised with the authority of their office. Now again, Canon 212 is often cited by people who want to publicly criticize and even condemn prelates and ordinaries and the Pope, whereas Canon 1373 is often cited by those who want to say that you can't criticize under any circumstances bishops or especially the Pope. And I think St. Thomas Aquinas' distinction helps us to understand how both can be true. The lay faithful and subjects can correct their superiors when it's done according to the first form of correction that St. Thomas identifies, which is done in charity and out of love and gentleness, with the intention of bringing their brother or their sister back into the fold and moving away from their correction. But what subjects can't do is wield a kind of correction that depends on justice or is informed by justice, which can then use coercive measures like punishment. So if you're going to criticize the Pope or your bishops for something that maybe is worthy of criticism, in the hopes that it will be a sort of an unpleasant experience for them or a form of punishment where you are inflicting something on them that will force a correction out of them, like maybe withholding money during a charitable appeal or appealing to Catholic journalistic outlets to try to expose them for their corruption. These are measures that a subject can't really employ towards their superior. Now, in the question of Cardinal Burke, he has been accused by many of the people jumping to the defense of Pope Francis by denouncing him for having been unfaithful or divisive or hubristic or whatever the particular accusation may be. But to be honest, I'm not aware of anything that Cardinal Burke has said or done which could be described in the manner that of St. Thomas's second form of correction, that according to justice. From what I've seen of Cardinal Burke, he's always done so with great reverence for the office of the Pope, out of gentleness and fraternal admiration and love. But some people are so offended by the fact that a subject would correct the Pope in any way, shape, or form that they just assume that his intention must be malicious. And this is something you just absolutely cannot do. For example, I might be in a conversation with somebody in which we're discussing some prudential governing decision that the Pope or any superior or any ordinary of the church might have made. And I could say, I don't think it was right for him to do that. Now, the problem with evaluating a statement like that is that it could have been expressed out of genuine concern and love for the church and the one who is perhaps being corrected or criticized in this case. Or it could be something that is done out of malice or a desire to impose punishment upon the superior. And the problem is that from the outside, if you're just someone who heard me or someone else make a statement like that, you actually can't really judge what my intention was for making that statement. You would have to be able to judge my heart, which is specifically the kind of judgment that Jesus condemns in the Gospels, because it's a judgment made without the knowledge that is necessary to make that judgment. But again, everything that I've seen from Burke seems to suggest that it is the kind that can be offered from a subject to his superior. Now, for those who insist that Burke deserves what he got and that he should be condemned, and they're carting out all of their evidence against him and denouncing him quite personally and publicly in many cases. I think that there's a great irony in this tactic that needs to be recognized in the context of this conversation, because the thing that they believe that Burke has done, which is unjustly criticizing his superior, is the very thing that they are doing to Burke himself. They say that he was uncharitable and divisive, and clearly, if they're familiar with St. Thomas's distinctions, that he was trying to use justice and punishment and undesirable effects to coerce the Pope into perhaps a position that he would have favored. And therefore, he deserves punishment. But what gives them the right to do the exact same thing that they say he was deserving of punishment for? They're correcting Cardinal Burke, who is their superior ecclesiastically, by trying to denounce him and express disapproval of him in a manner that is completely unbecoming. So you can't say that Burke has no right to offer any form of correction towards the Pope, and especially that form which is inappropriate when it's a subject towards his superior, and then turn around and do the exact same thing towards Cardinal Burke, who is your superior. The hypocrisy of that is just obnoxiously conspicuous. So in summary, to answer the question, are there cases in which a superior like the Pope can be corrected by one of his subjects? In the case of Pope John XXII, that's clearly the case. And because the popes can be wrong about certain statements, correction is a worthwhile thing to exercise within the body of the church. But the form of correction that it takes depends on the relationship of superior to subject. If it's subject to a superior, there are limitations upon the manner of correction and the intention behind it. If it's the case of a superior to a subject, then more is available to them through the exercise of their authority. And again, as far as the Burke affair is concerned, it seems to me that Burke was always very careful to maintain obedience to the first form and not the second form, which is why when lay people jump online and start condemning him, first of all, I think they're wrong, and second of all, they become guilty of the very thing that they accuse him of. If you're a Catholic who is a leader in your profession, and you're like me, you probably had some desire for more opportunities to network with other Catholic professional leaders in order to help each other grow professionally, spiritually, and economically. Because this is exactly what we're doing with Fisher's Network. We're mobilizing Catholic professionals and economic leaders into local crews so that they can better support one another in the hopes of building up something like a local Catholic economy. As they do so, they can better support their parish in a variety of ways. Imagine as a parish having a group of experts you can turn to for advice and support on business decisions that have to be made. This is why pastors participate in our crews as well. They get business mentorship while having the opportunity to build up leaders in their community. So if this sounds like a way to strengthen your local Catholic community or parish, consider becoming a member by visiting fishersnetwork.com.